The smell of roasted garlic, caramelized onions, and impending bankruptcy is a very specific olfactory cocktail. It was a scent that had permeated my clothes, my hair, and the very pores of my skin for the better part of 14 months. At 30 years old, I had poured every single ounce of my life savings, my sanity, and a terrifyingly high-interest small business loan into salt and cedar catering. It was supposed to be my triumph. It was supposed to be the glorious realization of a childhood dream hatched at my grandmother's kitchen counter. Instead, it was slowly bleeding me dry. Opening a boutique catering company in a city oversaturated with culinary talent was a gamble, and the house was currently winning. For the first year, I survived on corporate luncheons, lifeless trays of turkey wraps and tepid pasta salads for mid-level marketing firms. It paid the bills, barely, but it wasn't the high-end, bespoke culinary artistry I had trained for at Le Cordon Bleu. I was drowning in overhead costs. The rent for the commercial kitchen space was astronomical, the cost of premium ingredients was skyrocketing, and my meticulously assembled team of freelance sous chefs and waitstaff needed to be paid regardless of whether I turned a profit. I was staring down the barrel of a complete financial collapse. I had roughly 3 weeks before my business account hit zero, at which point the bank would swoop in, seize my professional-grade ovens, and auction off my dream to the highest bidder. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling of my cramped apartment, doing mental math that never added up, and wondering if I should just throw in the towel and beg for a line cook position at a chain restaurant. And then, as if summoned by the sheer magnitude of my desperation, the devil herself called. Aunt Cassandra was not just wealthy, she was aggressively, offensively wealthy. She was the kind of rich that didn't just insulate her from the real world, but allowed her to treat the real world as her own personal, sadistic playground. She had married into old money in her early 20s, inherited it all when her husband mysteriously drove his vintage Jaguar off a coastal highway in his 50s, and had spent the last 2 decades using her vast fortune to torment anyone she deemed beneath her. Which, in her eyes, was absolutely everyone. In our family, Cassandra was an apex predator. She was the woman who once wore a stunning, floor-length white gown to my cousin Sarah's wedding, openly criticized the floral arrangements during the toasts, and accidentally knocked a tray of red wine onto the bride's dress before the first dance. She was the woman who offered to pay for my brother's college tuition, only to withdraw the offer the day before tuition was due, because she decided his major in graphic design was too plebeian for her money. She didn't just enjoy being mean. She delighted in the absolute destruction of other people's happiness. It was her sport. So, when her name flashed across my phone screen on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my stomach instantly tied itself into a knot of cold dread. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, not since I started my business, which she had loudly proclaimed at a family Thanksgiving would be a spectacular, humiliating failure. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the red decline button. But the flashing eviction notice on my desk stayed my hand. I needed money, I was desperate. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello, Aunt Cassandra." "Ilara, darling." Her voice oozed through the speaker, dripping with a terrifying, artificial sweetness that immediately made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "I hear your little cooking hobby is floundering. Such a pity. I always told your mother you lacked the constitution for business." "I'm doing fine, Cassandra. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I kept my voice perfectly flat, refusing to give her the satisfaction of hearing the exhaustion in my tone. "Well, aren't we proud?" she chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I'm calling because I find myself in a bit of a bind, and I'm feeling uncharacteristically generous. As you know, I am chairing the annual Sapphire Gala for the City Arts Foundation next month. It is the social event of the season. 500 guests. The mayor, the city council, the absolute upper crust of society. She paused, letting the weight of the event sink in. The Sapphire Gala was legendary. It was the kind of event that could make a caterer's career overnight. Securing that contract meant instant prestige, a flood of elite clientele, and enough money to secure a business for a year. My usual caterer, Jean-Luc, had the audacity to suffer a mild heart attack this morning. Cassandra continued, her tone implying that Jean-Luc's medical emergency was a personal insult to her. The gala is exactly 14 days away. It is entirely too late to book another top-tier firm. They are all engaged, which leaves me scraping the bottom of the barrel. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. And you're offering the contract to me? Don't sound so suspicious, darling. It's unflattering. Yes, I am offering it to you. Consider it an act of profound familial charity. The budget is $40,000. Half upfront to cover your undoubtedly meager resources, and the other half upon successful completion of the dinner service. But I expect perfection, Allura. Absolute, uncompromising perfection. If a single fork is out of place, if a single piece of asparagus is overcooked, I will ruin you. Do we have an understanding? $40,000. The number echoed in my mind like a chorus of angels. It was exactly enough. It would pay off my immediate debts, cover the back rent on the kitchen, and give me a 6-month runway to actually build a profitable client base. It was a lifeline thrown by a monster, but I was drowning. I had no choice. I'll send over the contract by this evening, I said, my voice remarkably steady. You won't be disappointed, Cassandra. We shall see, she purred and hung up. The next 2 weeks were a blur of adrenaline, sheer terror, and agonizing physical labor. A 500-person plated dinner is a logistical nightmare even for an established, massive catering corporation. For my skeleton crew and me, it was akin to scaling Mount Everest without oxygen. I immediately cashed the $20,000 deposit, which, to my shock, actually cleared, and went to war. I hired 20 additional freelance servers, 3 extra sous chefs, and a small army of dishwashers. I spent 3 solid days negotiating with local farms and premium purveyors, sourcing the exact specifications Cassandra demanded. Her menu was designed to be incredibly difficult to execute on a massive scale. For the amuse-bouche, a delicate sphere of cantaloupe infused with prosciutto essence, utilizing molecular gastronomy techniques that required exact temperatures and pinpoint precision. For the appetizer, a pan-seared jumbo sea scallop resting on a bed of sweet corn puree, accented with a spicy chorizo crumble and a micro-cilantro garnish. Every single scallop had to be seared perfectly to a golden brown at the exact moment of service, meaning my team would be working over roaring flames in a frantic assembly line. The main course was a dual plate, a red wine braised beef short rib that had to melt in the mouth, paired with a butter-poached lobster tail, served alongside a truffle potato pave and bundles of haricots verts tied with blanched chives. Dessert was the crown jewel and the bane of my existence, a dark chocolate dome housing a passion fruit mousse. The servers were required to pour a hot, salted caramel sauce over the dome at the table, causing the chocolate to melt away theatrically to reveal the dessert inside. If the chocolate was too thick, it wouldn't melt. If the room was too warm, they would melt before reaching the tables. It was culinary Russian roulette. By the time the day of the gala arrived, I was running on exactly 4 hours of sleep over a 3-day period, sustained entirely by espresso and sheer, unadulterated anxiety. My hands were calloused and burned, my back ached with a dull, constant throb, but as I stood in the massive, gleaming industrial kitchen of the Grand Solstice Ballroom, I felt a surge of fierce pride. We were doing it. The prep was flawless. The short ribs had been braising for 48 hours and were practically falling apart at the mere sight of a fork. The lobster tails were perfectly prepped, resting in vats of clarified butter, awaiting the final heat. The chocolate domes were safely secured in temperature-controlled coolers. My staff, dressed in crisp black uniforms with silver ties, moved like a synchronized military unit. The ballroom itself was breathtaking. Vaulted ceilings painted with Renaissance-style frescoes, massive crystal chandeliers casting a warm, golden glow over 50 circular tables draped in heavy navy velvet. Centerpieces of towering white orchids and cascading silver branches dominated the room. At the very front, a raised stage housed a podium where Cassandra would undoubtedly hold court, flanked by the city's elite. At 4:00 p.m., 2 hours before the doors opened, I decided I needed a quiet moment. The kitchen was humming perfectly, and the noise of clattering pans and shouting chefs was giving me a migraine. I slipped out the back doors of the kitchen, navigating the labyrinthine velvet-lined service corridors of the historic ballroom, intending to find a quiet balcony overlooking the main floor just to breathe for 5 minutes. As I moved silently down the dimly lit hallway that ran parallel to the main dining room, I heard voices drifting through the heavy curtains that separated the corridor from the ballroom. I wouldn't have stopped, but the sharp, cruel trill of Aunt Cassandra's laugh acted like a physical tether. I paused, pressing my back against the wall, peering through a millimeter-wide gap in the thick, crimson velvet drapes. Cassandra was standing near the head table, holding a glass of champagne. She was flanked by her two closest sycophants, wealthy socialites named Miriam and Beatrice, who followed her around like pilot fish on a shark. "I must admit, Cassandra," Miriam was saying, adjusting a diamond necklace that cost more than my entire kitchen setup. "I was shocked when you told me who you hired. Your niece. The one with the failing little sandwich shop." "Oh, it's not a sandwich shop, Miriam. It's a catering boutique," Cassandra mocked, making extravagant air quotes with her manicured fingers. "And yes, it's on the verge of total collapse. I have it on very good authority that she's drowning in debt." "Then why on earth would you trust her with the Sapphire Gala?" Beatrice asked, looking genuinely perplexed. "If the food is dreadful, it reflects poorly on you." Cassandra took a slow, elegant sip of her champagne, her eyes glinting with a malice so pure it made my blood run cold. "Because, my dear, it's going to be the performance of the season. And it won't reflect poorly on me at all. It will make me look like a tragic victim, and it will finally squash that pathetic little dream of hers." My heart stopped. The ambient noise of the building seemed to fade away, leaving only the sickening sound of her voice in my ears. "What do you mean?" Miriam leaned in, hungry for the gossip. Cassandra smiled, a terrifying, reptilian stretching of her lips. "I have no intention of paying her the final $20,000. In fact, I have no intention of letting her keep the deposit, either. The food is irrelevant. It could be cooked by a Michelin-starred chef, and it wouldn't matter. Tonight, right before dessert is served, I am going to stand up at that podium. I am going to grab my stomach, look terribly distressed, and announce to all 500 of the most influential people in this city that the food is tainted. I will claim that several guests at my table are experiencing severe food poisoning." "No," Beatrice gasped, though she sounded more thrilled than appalled. "Yes," Cassandra purred. "I will publicly humiliate her. I will demand she be escorted from the premises. Tomorrow morning, my lawyers will file a massive lawsuit for breach of contract, public endangerment, and emotional distress. I will sue her into total bankruptcy. She'll be working a drive-through window by Christmas. It will be glorious." "But what if she fights it? What if the health department tests the food?" Miriam asked. "Let them," Cassandra laughed. "By the time the bureaucracy sorts it out, the damage will be done. The headlines will already be printed. Mayor poisoned at charity gala by incompetent caterer. Her reputation will be obliterated instantly. Who would ever hire her after that? The lawsuit will drain whatever pennies she has left. It's foolproof. And, as an added bonus, I keep the $40,000 in my own accounts. It's a win-win." I stood frozen in the shadows, paralyzed by a sickening wave of absolute betrayal and terror. My vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges of my sight. My hands, still smelling of the garlic and thyme I had painstakingly rubbed into the short ribs, began to shake violently. She wasn't just trying to cheat me out of the money. She was trying to destroy my life. She was planning to weaponize the legal system and the media to humiliate me in front of the entire city, crushing my business, my reputation, and my spirit, simply because she thought it would be fun. A heavy, suffocating panic threatened to pull me under. I wanted to run. I wanted to storm out there, scream in her face, and flip the table over. I wanted to pack up my kitchen and flee into the night. But then, as quickly as the panic had come, it vanished. It was replaced by something else entirely. A profound, icy, calculating rage. I was not the timid little girl she used to bully at family reunions anymore. I was a business owner who had spent the last year fighting tooth and nail for survival. I had burned my arms on industrial ovens. I had haggled with ruthless fishmongers at 4 in the morning. I had cried myself to sleep over spreadsheets. I had earned my place here, and I was not going to let this miserable, vindictive woman take it from me. I took a deep, silent breath, forcing my heart rate to slow. I needed evidence. Without it, it was my word against the most powerful socialite in the city. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the voice memo app, hit the red record button, and carefully, silently, slipped the phone through the tiny gap in the curtains, resting it on the wide wooden baseboard just inches from where they were standing. The heavy velvet concealed it perfectly. I pressed my ear to the gap, praying they would keep talking. "Are you sure you want to go through with it, Cassandra?" Miriam asked, a slight edge of hesitation in her voice. "It seems a bit extreme." "Extreme?" Cassandra scoffed, her voice perfectly captured by the microphone mere feet away. "It's necessary. The girl is arrogant. She thinks because she can whisk a béarnaise sauce, she is an equal. She needs to be taught her place. And frankly, I am bored. This city's social scene has been terribly dull lately. A high-profile lawsuit, a dramatic public poisoning. It's exactly the kind of theater this gala needs to be memorable. I've already drafted the statement my publicist will release tomorrow. I'm going to ruin Alara, and it is going to be magnificent." I waited for another 2 minutes, letting the recording capture their vicious, cackling laughter and their detailed discussion of exactly which lawyers they would use to bleed me dry. When they finally turned and walked away toward the foyer to greet the early arrivals, I quickly snatched my phone back through the curtain. I looked at the screen. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of pure, unadulterated extortion and malice, recorded in crystal-clear audio. A slow, dark smile spread across my face. Cassandra wanted theater. She wanted a memorable performance. I was going to give her a masterpiece. I marched back into the kitchen, the exhaustion completely burned away by a raging adrenaline high. The chaos of the final prep was in full swing, but to my newly focused eyes, it looked like a beautiful symphony. "Listen up, everyone!" I clapped my hands loudly, drawing the attention of my 30-person staff. The kitchen fell silent. "Tonight is the most important service of our lives. I want absolute perfection. I want the scallops seared so beautifully they make the angels weep. I want the short ribs plated with military precision. Do not give these people a single reason to complain. We are going to serve them the best meal they have ever had in their miserable, wealthy lives. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, chef," echoed off the stainless steel walls. I spent the next hour overseeing every single detail with the ruthless intensity of a hawk. When the first course was called, I stood at the pass, inspecting every single plate of the delicate cantaloupe spheres. They were flawless. Jewels of culinary perfection. The service began. The waitstaff flowed out of the kitchen doors like a synchronized ballet, carrying the enormous trays overhead. Through the small porthole window in the kitchen door, I watched the dining room. Cassandra was in her element, holding court at the center table, seated next to Mayor Thomas Sterling, a stern-faced politician known for his utter lack of a sense of humor. The amuse-bouche was a hit. I could see the expressions of surprise and delight rippling across the tables. Next came the scallops. The kitchen turned into a fiery crucible. We seared 500 scallops in exactly 12 minutes. Plated, sauced, garnished, and out the door. Again, absolute perfection. Through the window, I watched the mayor take a bite, close his eyes, and nod approvingly at Cassandra. Cassandra smiled thinly, taking a tiny, performative bite of her own, completely unaware of the doom hanging over her head. The main course was an operational triumph. Hot plates, perfect temperatures, flawless presentation. By the time the plates were being cleared, a murmur of deep, satisfied appreciation had settled over the massive ballroom. I had delivered on my end of the bargain. The food was spectacular. Now, it was time for dessert. And time for Cassandra's move. I wiped my hands on my apron, smoothed down my hair, and walked out the back door of the kitchen. But I didn't go into the dining room. I went to the AV booth at the back of the ballroom. Earlier in the day, during setup, I had brought a plate of fresh-baked croissants to the lone audiovisual technician, a scruffy, overworked guy named Dave. I had sat with him for 10 minutes, asking him about his complicated mixing board, showing genuine interest in his job. When I opened the door to the booth, Dave looked up surprised. "Hey chef, incredible food tonight, what's up?" "Hey Dave, I have a massive favor to ask," I said, my voice urgent but calm. "Aunt Cassandra, The host is planning a surprise for the mayor right before dessert. An audio surprise. I need to plug my phone into the main board, and I need you to cut her microphone the second she starts speaking, and patch my audio through to every speaker in the house. Dave frowned. I usually need clearance from the event coordinator for that kind of stuff. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill I kept for emergencies, sliding it across the console. Dave, if you don't do this, the surprise is ruined, and Cassandra will likely fire both of us and ensure we never work in this town again. You know how she is. Dave looked at the money, then at me, then shuddered. Everyone knew Cassandra's reputation. He grabbed the bill and shoved it in his pocket. All right, give me the aux cord. I plugged my phone in, queued up the voice memo, and turned the volume to the absolute maximum. I stood next to Dave, looking out through the tinted glass window of the booth, overlooking the entire glittering ballroom. The waiters were beginning to circle the room, holding the trays of the dark chocolate domes. Down at the head table, I saw Cassandra check her diamond-encrusted watch. She leaned over to Miriam, whispered something, and then stood up. The room began to quiet down as people noticed the host rising. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it elegantly against her crystal champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. The 500 guests fell utterly silent, turning their attention to the stage. Cassandra picked up the wireless microphone from the table and stepped out from behind the orchids, placing her hand delicately over her stomach. She arranged her features into a mask of sudden, tragic distress. Ladies and gentlemen, Cassandra's voice boomed through the massive speakers, dripping with fake sorrow. I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt this beautiful evening. However, I am afraid I have some terrible news. She paused dramatically, looking down at the mayor. It pains me to say this, but I must ask you all to stop eating immediately. I am feeling terribly ill, and several guests at my table are experiencing severe abdominal distress. I fear the caterer has served us tainted food. We have been poisoned. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. The mayor dropped his napkin, looking horrified. Whispers began to erupt across the room like a shockwave. Cassandra took a deep breath, preparing to launch into her grand monologue of condemnation. Cut her mic, I whispered to Dave. Hit play. Cassandra opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She tapped the microphone in confusion. And then, my voice memo played. It didn't just play. It roared out of the massive, concert-grade stadium speakers rigged throughout the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom, echoing off the Renaissance frescoes with terrifying clarity. I have no intention of paying her the final $20,000. Cassandra's recorded voice was deafening, the cruel, sneering tone amplified 1,000 times over. In fact, I have no intention of letting her keep the deposit, either. The food is irrelevant. Down on the floor, Cassandra froze. Her eyes went wide, the color completely draining from her carefully powdered face. She looked like she had just been struck by lightning. The crowd instantly fell into a dead, paralyzed silence. Tonight, right before dessert is served, I am going to stand up at that podium. I am going to grab my stomach, look terribly distressed, and announce to all 500 of the most influential people in this city that the food is tainted. The mayor slowly turned his head to look at Cassandra. His expression shifted from horror to a look of absolute, unadulterated fury. I will claim that several guests at my table are experiencing severe food poisoning. The recording continued, the malice echoing through the grand hall. Miriam and Beatrice, sitting at the head table, physically shrank back into their chairs, desperately trying to look invisible. I will publicly humiliate her. I will demand she be escorted from the premises. Tomorrow morning, my lawyers will file a massive lawsuit for breach of contract, public endangerment, and emotional distress. I will sue her into total bankruptcy. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. 500 of the city's most powerful people were sitting perfectly still, listening to one of their own proudly detail a premeditated, malicious plot to destroy an innocent woman's life for sport. She'll be working a drive-through window by Christmas. It will be glorious. I let the recording play through the final lines, capturing her laughter about the headlines, her blatant admission of wanting to keep the charity's money for herself, and her final, damning sentence. I'm going to ruin Alara, and it is going to be magnificent. The recording clicked off, the echo faded into the rafters, the silence stretched for 3 agonizing, heavy seconds, and then the room erupted. It wasn't a murmur. It was a roar of outrage. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as people stood up. The mayor slammed his hand down on the table, pointing a shaking finger directly at Cassandra's face. He was shouting, though over the din of the crowd, I couldn't hear the exact words. I didn't need to. The vein pulsing in his forehead told me everything. Cassandra was trembling violently. She dropped the dead microphone, which hit the floor with a dull thud. She looked frantically around the room, making eye contact with the people she had spent decades terrorizing and manipulating. There was no sympathy. There was only disgust, contempt, and the absolute destruction of her social standing. She had just publicly humiliated herself in front of everyone who mattered, revealing herself to be not just a bully, but a fraud willing to disrupt a major charity event and panic the mayor for a petty vendetta. She turned and fled. She practically ran off the stage, her high heels clicking frantically on the hardwood, pushing past the waitstaff as she made a beeline for the side exit that led toward the private dressing rooms. I thanked Dave, who was staring out the window with his jaw literally hanging open, and made my way down the stairs. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, calmly, back through the kitchen. I signaled my head waiter. Pour the caramel over the chocolate domes now. The show must go on. I stepped out of the kitchen and walked down the velvet corridor toward the dressing rooms. I found Cassandra in the bride's suite, pacing frantically, her hands shaking as she tried to dial her phone. When the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, she spun around, her eyes wide and wild. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You vicious, conniving little. You recorded me. That's illegal. I'll have you arrested, I'll have you destroyed." "Actually, Cassandra, we are in a one-party consent state regarding audio recordings," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I looked it up while my short ribs were braising. "And you were speaking in a public venue with no reasonable expectation of privacy." She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. She was hyperventilating, the reality of her social execution setting in. "You're done, Cassandra," I said, my tone flat, dropping the final nail into her coffin. "The mayor is out there right now, calling the police chief to discuss whether your little stunt qualifies as inciting a public panic. The board of the City Arts Foundation is likely drafting your removal as chairwoman as we speak. You are a pariah." She sank onto a plush velvet ottoman, putting her head in her hands. The formidable, terrifying monster of my childhood was suddenly just a pathetic, aging woman in a very expensive dress, utterly broken by her own hubris. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my apron. It was the final invoice. "I want the remaining $20,000, I said coldly. "And frankly, considering the emotional distress you intentionally plan to inflict upon me, I think an additional $10,000 inconvenience fee is more than fair. Otherwise, I will hand that audio file directly to the mayor's office, the local news stations, and every single one of your wealthy friends by midnight." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with venom but also with profound defeat. She knew she was trapped. If that audio went to the press, she wouldn't just be a social pariah. She could face actual legal consequences for attempted fraud. With shaking hands, she reached for her designer purse, pulled out a gold-plated checkbook, and furiously scribbled out a check for $30,000. She tore it out and practically threw it at me. "Take it," she spat. "Take it and get out of my sight. You are no longer family to me." I picked the check up off the floor, inspecting it to make sure the numbers were correct. They were. My business was saved. My debts were cleared. I had won. "That's the best compliment you've ever given me, Aunt Cassandra." I turned and walked out the door, leaving her alone in the dressing room. When I returned to the kitchen, the atmosphere was electric. The waitstaff were returning with empty dessert plates. Through the window, I could see the guests talking excitedly, the tension broken by the arrival of the spectacular melting chocolate domes. The mayor was eating his dessert with gusto, looking significantly more relaxed now that the host had vanished. My head chef walked up to me, wiping sweat from his brow. "Chef, what the hell happened out there?" The whole room went crazy, and the host took off. I looked at the $30,000 check in my hand, then out at the glittering ballroom filled with people who had just eaten the best meal of their lives. I smiled, feeling the crushing weight of the past 14 months completely lift off my shoulders. Just a little change in the evening's entertainment, I said, tying my apron a little tighter. Now, get the dishwashers moving. We have a kitchen to clean, and we're officially booked solid for the rest of the year.